Mike, I'm doing great. It's great to talk to you again, and it's been a little while, so we got some good updates. But excited to talk about operations and how things have been scaling. It's a good question. I do ask myself pretty frequently, what the hell was I thinking? I mean, it's not your, I guess, typical career progression to go hard pivot from being an IT procurement buyer at SpaceX to owning a winery. Um, but but it's been a lot of fun. I don't regret a minute of it. I think what really helped me find clarity on what I wanted to do was spending more and more time up in wine country and actually finally I guess evolving from just a fan of wine that I had been all my life. My dad raised me around wine. He would buy grapes and we would make wine together in my basement. But me becoming more than just a fan and really falling in love with the people behind the industry. Every winemaker is willing to have a conversation with you. Every vineyard owner is willing to have a conversation with you. That sense of camaraderie was actually pretty absent in the tech industry. I mean, tech is known for being a relatively cutthroat industry, which I love. There's parts of me that watches Succession and is like, let's go. The industry's on every Sunday, so I love the cutthroat aspect, but I also enjoy being able to take a step back and say, look, we're all working on a product that we love. Wine is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, consumable packaged good ever created. It's been there for every major event in human history. And it's pretty cool to be able to create that and try and make an impact on something that's so historic. There's a lot of missteps you can make when getting into wine, especially if you're going to start your own company. As you alluded to early on in the interview, the old joke is if you want to make $1 million in wine, start with $10 million. It is very easy to get, I guess, self-absorbed in what your impact can be on the industry. And at least in kind of the 90s and the 2000s, and even in the 2010s, people, like you said, just wanted to create new brands. They said, I'm going to go create the greatest Pinot Noir in the world. We never had that ambition. There is a family in Burgundy that's been producing Pinot Noir for, 700, 800 years. Joe coming out of SpaceX is not going to beat them. They've got, so much knowledge passed down. They know the soil so well that you'll never disrupt. And so the opportunity that we saw wasn't so much trying to make the greatest wine in the world, but helping share this kind of lifelong hobby that is wine exploration with more people and really be the gateway for a new generation of wine drinkers to usher into exploring wine. They got to start somewhere. Who's going to be that kind of hook that can bring them in, give them an aha moment, make them take a risk, and allow them to explore a little bit. And so we had decided to attack this by coming up with a pretty simple solution that ended up being not so simple to actually implement. But we realized wine was the only one size fits all product uh, in consumables. The full bottle of wine was it. You got a 750 milliliter bottle. That was it. You could not buy really anything else. Cans were just starting to get on the market. Maybe there was those plastic airplane bottles that nobody felt good about, but above all, it is a luxury product. And we decided to create the world's most luxurious by the glass bottle of wine. And so we did that and set out to create that in late 2017. created the packaging ourselves, and have really been pushing to try and become the leader in premium single serving wine, so that, again, we can sit at that gateway to bring in new customers. Technically, we do, but we don't own a vineyard. So we own a, yeah. So we source our grapes from vineyards. Basically, the wine industry is broken down into wineries and vineyards, and they're not always the same. They can be, and if you go visit Napa, they'll have their what's called estate grown or estate bottled wines. That generally means that that wine comes from grapes from a vineyard that they own that's on their estate. But the vast majority of the industry is separated between being a winery and a vineyard. And a winery buys the grapes or contracts the grapes from somebody else, crushes them, ferments them, filters them, processes them, bottles them, and sells them under our own brand. The vineyard's responsible kind of for the farming aspect. So it allows you to get into wine without having to be a year-round farmer, which is its own massive challenge. Well, initially, we actually did buy grapes. When we first started the business, we didn't want to create any new brands of wine. We partnered with wineries and rebottled their full bottles into our mini bottles. It was a terrible business model. I highly recommend nobody ever do that. Pretty much, pretty much. Except we had to go through a process where the wine wouldn't touch oxygen. So we had this glove box that we purged with nitrogen, and then we would open up their bottle of wine, pour it into ours, buy a new miniature label of theirs, and slap it on, so that customers could kind of sample from different wineries. And yeah, terrible business model, horrible operation. It failed very quickly. And so then we had to pivot and actually go buy grapes and produce our own wines. And we were very fortunate to work with a winemaker who had a lot of connections and could allow us to, try and make mistakes along the way of, different regions, different wineries. Everyone's willing to sell a little something when you're getting started. You don't need that much inventory. From a grape standpoint and a wine standpoint, it's not an issue, especially for us, because we make mini bottles of wine. 1 gallon of wine basically equates to 20 mini bottles, and we sell variety kits. So each variety kit only has one mini bottle of one type of wine. So 1 gallon makes 20 variety kits worth. Everyone has a leftover barrel or they have a leftover ton of grapes that they're willing to give their friends if you've got, a winemaker who's plugged into the community. Where we really ran up to problems with minimum order quantity was around our bottles because those were completely custom made. We had designed them ourselves. We've since patented them, but that was a really big struggle for us early on of buying glass to even be able to produce our product. 100%. It still is. Oh yeah. Yeah, we started sourcing from China originally and dealt with probably all the things that most people deal with. You've got quality issues. Occasionally, you'll get a pallet of perfume bottles shipped instead of your wine bottles. I mean, just all these little things that add up over time. Dirty bottles that we can't use. And so there's a lot of headaches. But when COVID hit in particular and the ports were shut down, our sales were skyrocketing. And we had to deal with exponential growth and a really constricted supply chain, which resulted in a lot of trips of us driving to the port so that we could get the bottles off the dock that exact day in Los Angeles and drive it up to San Francisco because our margins were in days and hours, so we couldn't afford to wait 2 days for somebody else to deliver it. Yes, I'm not allowed to rent from Enterprise trucks anymore. I unfortunately punched a hole in the side of an Enterprise truck while driving glass up to San Francisco, and they won't let me rent anymore. Sure. I think we created as many experiences around our products as we possibly could. A bottle of wine is a bottle of wine. And for a new drinker, when you go to the grocery store, you're looking at red, white, rosé, and then is it 20 to 22 bucks and does it have a cute label? There's not really an emotional connection to it. By creating tasting flights, we created conversation. You would buy one and you share it with your partner and have a conversation. Which mini bottle did you like best? Pitching it as more of a tasting experience versus just buy wine from us online really worked out, and in COVID led to being able to capitalize on virtual tasting. So we were able to acquire one customer who wanted to set up an event and would get 8 of their friends to purchase. And so for the price of one customer, we've now got 8, 10, 100 customers. And we still do quite a bit of that, even to this day, with companies around the United States who want to have those virtual events, want to have that kind of connectivity. They use us for virtual wine tastings. Yeah, definitely. Wine's hard to relate to with products like Gewürztraminer. Nobody looks at that in a grocery store unless they know what they're talking about and goes, "Oh yeah, Gewürztraminer sounds delicious. I'll try. I'll risk $25 on that." They don't, but there is this innate behavior that people try wines by the glass. They do it at wine bars, they do it in wine country, and now they can actually purchase it by the glass. And we've seen that in a couple of different factors. Obviously, the rise of canned wine has played into that, and then our form factor trying to be the kind of super premium version of that really plays into that idea that wine is more than just the drink. It's the feel of the bottle in your hand. It's the pop of the cork. It's really the whole experience. I think that what is rising tide raises all ships, right? So the more people are getting familiar with alternative formats, it's not so much us versus can versus Tetra Pak or box. It's let's get consumers to trust wine that doesn't come in this traditional full bottle, and the more accepting they are of cans means the more accepting they're going to be of our form factor. And also from a retailer standpoint, the more optionality there is, the more shelf space ends up getting dedicated that we can all compete over. And so I think it's helped quite a bit more so than been sort of direct competition. It was late 2022 we made the decision. So really, we've only started launching retail in 2023 last year. Kind of actually late towards last year, we signed a distribution agreement with Southern Glaziers and really started pushing aggressively in Q4 23, and obviously now until Q4 this year. It's a good question. My thought process may be different from some founders. So, I mean, taking a step back before even getting into why we decide where we want to see growth, we're a vertically integrated business, and we're one of the very few CPG companies our size that is vertically integrated. We've got a 50,000 square foot warehouse. We bottle our own wine, we pack and we ship all of our own products. Our biggest challenge is that our seasonality from direct to consumer skews so heavy towards Q3 and Q4, where we have to pack 1 million bottles a month, that it doesn't carry forward in January, February, March, and April. So if you look at our finances, we struggle in the first half of the year and we knock it out of the park in the second half of the year. And for my anxiety and blood pressure, I'd love to, steady out the first half of the year without sacrificing anything the second half of the year. And so that's really where we see retail come into play because we are so operational focused that when you have this machine, when you've got this system that you've created, you want to be at 100% capacity. That becomes more important almost than finding the exact channel. You want to grow what makes sense to grow. You want to grow the time of year almost that makes sense. And so I think, going forward, we're going to see retail continue to grow. We're up to about 1,000 accounts. We're nationwide with Cost Plus World Market. We'll continue to bring on accounts like that, but we're by no means going to pivot all of our resources and all of our business into growing retail. It's a nice thing to help us out in the first half and the first 3 quarters of the year, but direct to consumer is going to pay the bills. And retail, as everyone knows, can be incredibly expensive. And so by having this really strong and profitable direct to consumer channel, we don't have to put as much pressure on ourselves to get to 20,000, 30,000 doors as fast as possible if we can be in retail in a profitable way. Well, it's cyclical, but when you look at retail, at least in alcohol, those cycles affect the supplier several quarters earlier. So OND is when grocery stores like Target and World Market will sell the most wine, but they're placing those purchase orders from their distributor in September, and that distributor's placing the purchase order from the winery in July. And so operationally, it shifts all of the work earlier in the year. And then from a marketing standpoint, you actually don't have to do as much in OND because everybody in America has to spend time with their family. Ergo, they're going to drink a lot more. And so you can try and capitalize on that and double down there. But what we do is we basically made the strategic decision to say, we're not going to go as aggressive for marketing in Q4. We're going to put our marketing efforts to help velocities Q1 and Q2, even though they're a little bit slower because we want more volume there. And we've got our direct consumer in Q4. And we know it's going to move off the shelf without us doing tastings every day at every account. Yeah, you definitely are. I mean, at the very worst case scenario, let's say your business is really struggling. If you've got a $200,000 purchase order signed and delivered from your distributor, you could finance that purchase order. So you're sure it's going to be expensive, but it's something that could get you some cash flow to help you through the summer months into the fall months. And as our business has grown, it's always been great. We've knocked it out of the park. 2020 it was like we did great in October, November. 2021 we did great September, October, November. 2022, August, October, November. We're just trying to buy 1 month earlier that we can do really strong so that it is a very holistic year that builds up naturally versus being so teeter totter. I think again, this could be a polarizing view. When we launched with most of our bigger partners, we didn't do too much to support them for the first month and a half. There's the idea that you go in with a huge launch and a big bang and you devote a lot of time and resource and energy to it. But what we thought is that if the product can't sell itself at some point in your company's career, then why are you in that account? If a gas station picks you up and you have to spend marketing dollars to move velocity in that gas station, you're never going to have a profitable outlet there. And so we look at things like customer acquisition cost per outlet and per point of distribution and figure out kind of when those payback periods are. And so by kind of waiting for a month or two, it allowed us to establish a very natural baseline of what sales can be. And then we can improve through different marketing efforts. Because otherwise, you just don't know if your marketing efforts are successful. Your numbers could look amazing, but if you turn off, aisle or, these big discount programs, they could fall to zero. And so you can, artificial numbers could be helpful from pitches, but we're trying to build retail as profitably as possible. And so we told, even Target, like, hey, let's figure out what the baseline is. Then we'll use things like emailing our customer base, Instagram ads, aisle, other softwares to drive people to your product and make sure that it converts. That's a great question. I wish on premise would work more than it does. On premise for alcohol is where the velocities are absolutely the highest. And CPG in general, I think alcohol is a weird space in CPG because everyone thinks about snacks and packaged goods and then they kind of bundle alcohol into CPG, but it's different. Yeah. But there's regulation, but there's the ability to sell to restaurants. If I sell beef jerky, I can't really sell to restaurants. And unfortunately, mini bottles don't actually do that much for most restaurants. They're really effective at restaurants who don't sell a lot of wine, which conversely kind of defeats the purpose. But if you sell a lot of wine, your margins at a restaurant are going to be better if you buy a full bottle. It's going to be easier. You're going to make more money. And so I wish we could do better on premise because that is where the majority of revenue comes from for a lot of wineries are these on premise accounts, and they're the most highly sought after and thought over accounts. But we do where we've kind of carved out our niche in the quote unquote on premise is at hotels. Hotels are some of our highest velocity accounts where the average length of stay is one night. People don't want to buy a full bottle of wine. They just want a nice glass in their room and they don't want it to be a can. They don't want it to be a little airplane bottle. They want something nice. And so that's kind of our balance of like, yes, it's on premise, but it's not technically a restaurant. It's like a grab and go market. Yeah, we developed different tasting programs at our own bar, which seems kind of weird for a company that sells tasting flights that we had to relearn how to sell tasting flights. But if we poured our people on premise, if you came to our bar and we poured you mini bottles of every single wine, which is what we actually did at first, you as a customer effectively got two full bottles of wine. Nobody could finish it. It was way too much alcohol because each one of our bottles is a quarter bottle of wine, and we wanted you to taste through, eight or so wines. And so we had to obviously dial that back quite a bit from a pour standpoint and figure out how to use our mini bottles to split into multiple tastings. We've then packaged that up and taken it to other wine bars and other restaurants and said, hey, you can now have a tasting flight option on your menu without the risk of opening up 5 bottles that aren't going to get finished and are going to go bad. And so that was kind of our first push there, and it helped us kind of open the door a little bit. But where we're now finding a lot of success is infused wines. And so we just released a jalapeno infused spicy rosé, and we tested it at our tasting room. Our customers went absolutely crazy for it. We couldn't keep it in stock. And we started selling it to other restaurants for as an on-premise play, and they've had a lot of success there. Well, initially, we always wanted to bring people into the wine industry. That was always really the goal. And the way we approached it at first had some success. But what we've learned over the years is that the customers we were attracting already liked wine. They were just nervous. They were still buying a bottle of wine. They were still, drinking white or red, but they weren't really expanding. They knew that they were wine drinkers, though, and we helped them become wine enthusiasts. What we weren't capturing are the people who go to the grocery store and aren't sure, am I going to buy beer, wine, cocktail, seltzer? That's what the infused wines are really targeting, is pulling people from other categories into wine as kind of their first entry point with different flavors, because then we can move them down this wine journey as they become more sophisticated, as their palate develops and they fall more in love. So it's kind of an up funnel play. So thankfully, we've actually had so much complexity with the different number of wines, even traditional varietals that we have in our warehouse. I think right now we've got 52 different wines. So the ops team, they'll take care of that. Ops has got that. Our winemakers say he's fine. So operational complexity is not that difficult, just from the way we started. But in order to kind of test these ideas, it all starts at the tasting room. That's where we can get really immediate feedback. And there's no magic science to it. You are kind of going off of gut. It's based very much on the brewery model, where a brewery come up with something fun and creative, and they would just pour it on tap at their draft pub and see, what the customer reaction is. Are they pleasantly excited? Like, you can kind of catch that magic in people's eyes in direct consumer packaged goods. And then once it's past that kind of smell test, then you start looking at data. Then you go, okay, how many can I sell online? How many are being purchased in store after somebody's tasted them? If it passes certain muster there, then you start to scale it up. But we're fortunate that the wine industry has tasting festivals. In fact, we're pouring in a tasting festival this weekend. And most of the time, these wine festivals are just excuses for people to get drunk. If you've got another Pinot Noir, nobody's going to remember your Pinot Noir because there's 40 other Pinot Noirs pouring next to you. If you're the only spicy rosé at this tasting festival, you are the belle of the ball. You are something new. You are something exciting. So that was what really actually connected for us. Is we just took a flyer and randomly decided to pour this at a festival, and we had lines around the block, and everyone was rushing up to try this. This debate has raged back and forth internally in this company. Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head there. This has raged back and forth. Um, yes, we talk about it all the time. Right now, it is not in full bottles. We are only going after mini bottles, single serve. And the idea is that it's such a drastically different flavor profile for wine that especially with on-premise accounts, they're worried about waste. They don't want to open up a full bottle and be pouring it the next day. They want that done. And so they can remove that risk early on and say, you know what, sure, I'll try it with these mini bottles. And yes, my margin could be better if I bought it in full bottles, but we're talking about $1 a bottle here. So let's test this out. And then if it goes well, we'll upgrade it to full bottles. But our form factor is so unique that it plays to this trial period. And the challenge with a spicy rosé is nobody's done it before. And so the consumers have to try this. Sampling is a huge part of getting in front of people. And the cheaper I can make it for somebody to try this, the more effective it's going to be. Hmm. Cash. Cash is king. Cash is king. Cash is always king. Because because $100 in cogs, we can turn $100 in cash into $200 in cogs, right? Because we can always buy, like, wine costs differ week to week. If $100 in cogs are red wine, well, that's not that much. In white wine, it could be a lot more. And so having the cash, just as a business owner, cash is always king. You want to have that flexibility. Sure. Yep. Yeah. I think once you get to a certain scale, especially in retail, like you look at like Siete, right? They just sold to Pepsi and they were in every single point of distribution they could possibly get into. For them, the product does sell itself. Once you get to that place where you're not marketing at Safeway. Safeway just orders from you because they trust your product at this point. Then you definitely take COGS. But for us, we're not quite at 1.2 billion. We're missing about the one and the point two, but we'll get there pretty soon. Mike, I really enjoyed it and happy to chat again.